Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of StreamTime Sports. I'm your host Nick Meacham and just recovering now from our big week in SportsPro Madrid last week, where we had close to 1,000 people at our event talking all things sports and sports media. Really exciting event, lots that I want to dig into in a future podcast with the key takeaways and the discussion points, because it's just such a fascinating place to come to each year, and you hear how the sports industry and the media industry alike is really looking at the opportunity around sports and where their focuses and priorities are, and they are really evolving quickly. But this week's podcast is actually a live podcast recording we did on stage during the event, and where I was joined by the COO of Kings League, the GM of OTT for OneFootball, and Nicola Moffat, who's ex-YouTube senior executive, who was one of the masterminds on the UEFA Women's Champions League DAZN YouTube relationship, and has since set up her own consultancy business, which you'll hear more about on the podcast. Really interesting conversation. It's great when you can get an opportunity to bring someone who's worked in the big tech space, someone who's worked from a platform perspective, and someone who's launching a truly disruptive competitor sport like the Kings League. And for those that haven't followed the Kings League's journey, you'll learn more about it on the podcast, but it's probably one of the most talked about sports properties in sports right now because of the disruptive way they are approaching the industry. And look, this conversation is all about disruption. We talk about different ways of driving monetization and how it can be done successfully. Some of the things that are holding back sports in growing at the rate we need, the role technology can play in driving the growth of sports, and a whole bunch more, and some real tangible examples of what we've seen across the industry and what we've seen through platforms and innovators like YouTube, OneFootball, and Kings League, and so much more. So unfortunately, obviously my co-host Chris, who's still on leave, wasn't able to join us at Madrid. So it is me solo with my guests here, but it is probably one of my favorite panel discussions I've had on stage in the last few years. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. Without any further ado, here's me talking to Yannick Ramcke, Ed Scott, and Nicola Moffat on stage at SportsPro Madrid. Hope you enjoy.
Oh, love that. A round of applause at the start. Good way to start the afternoon. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Nick Meacham. I'm CEO at SportsPro. I'm also the host and co-host of StreamTime Sports podcast, which is a weekly podcast digging into all the fun and games we have in the sports media industry today. So we want to use this as an opportunity to bring that podcast a little bit to life and really dig into the disruption that's happening in our industry and perhaps needs to happen still from here on. And so we've got my three guests to my left here are people who all have very complementary backgrounds in different types of organizations. And we're going to dig into what we see through their own eyes, what sports needs to do to really, I guess, take advantage of the situation we have in front of us. So without any further ado, I'd like to if we can do a quick around the ground, so to speak, starting with you, Yannick, of your background and give a bit of a nuts and bolts view on OneFootball and what it's delivering today.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. Yannick Ramcke, General Manager OTT at OneFootball. In a nutshell, what is OneFootball about? I think out of the gate, like 15 years ago, by now, the company started as a live scoring news app for football fans. I think one of the benefits early on was that they were early in productizing this whole experience in form of a mobile application. So one of the first, I think 1,000 apps in the Apple App Store. And yeah, I would say ever evolving ever since. A lot of turns left and right, but today I think it's best to describe us as a global digital football media platform that at some point decided, okay, we have built up a install base in the millions. Let's and looking at left and right what's going on in the industry, let's open up this access to that install base to third parties. So today we are a platform where third-party content creators can build, develop, engage, and hopefully down the line also monetize an audience. And that's what we are about. I'm heading the video side of the content business, where we try to create value for video creators, for the users, and other stakeholders like brands that are in between of this value exchange.
And OneFootball is one of been those organisations that we've had at this event across the last few years, because they've taken a very unique and different approach than the traditional media outlets, which we'll talk a bit more about as we go along, Yannick. So thank you. Nikki, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I've got my own consultancy now, Viveda Consulting, working with fast growth, scale up organisations on their strategy execution. But my background is very long term in sports and media. So I was at YouTube as the head of ads monetization for sport and music. And prior to that, I was at ITV. So a long time in this space.
Good stuff. And Ed, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Nick. Thanks to you and the rest of the team to invite us here today. And just want to send regards to Chris Stone, who couldn't be here, unfortunately. So I'm the Chief Operations and Competitions Officer at Kings League. Background more originally on the sort of sports coaching performance side, transitioned into administration management over the years. Spent a long time in more traditional sports before landing where I am today. And as an intro to the Kings League, I think in this, let's say, English language environment, some people are familiar, some people less familiar, but we're an innovative seven-a-side football competition, merging the traditional sport with new innovations, including the streamer content creator ecosystem, football legends, chairing teams, and bringing insights from esports and video games, secret weapons, and having the very sort of high degrees of fan engagement behind a free view, let's say, content strategy, which I'm sure during this afternoon we'll touch on a bit more.
Absolutely. So for those of you that aren't already subscribed to the StreamTime Sports podcast, get out your phone and subscribe, please. So let's beef up those numbers for me. Thank you. Now let's talk a little bit about, firstly, the fan. We often talk a little bit too much about some of the other aspects of the industry around monetization and technology, and they're important, but really want to dig into first what fans really want, because I've heard a few conversations recently where people are coming to the realization that sports doesn't talk quite enough about what they actually want from a consumption perspective, and not just talking about live sports alone, because that isn't, in this day and age, it's not all about live. There is a lot more going on that people really want and what makes people fans. So let's talk about what fans really want, perhaps starting with you, Yannick, again.
No, absolutely. But I think we need to be a bit careful, because we already presume that everybody is a fan.
True.
So I think, like, in the bigger video, not only video, but entertainment marketplace, I think making consumers a fan of some sports, it's like the box number one to tick. But let's presume that's the case. I think, like, it's about things that humans normally crave, like gratification instantaneously nowadays, belonging, sense of achievement. So I think it's a broad spectrum of things that people are seeking, but describing that to the point is actually the challenge, or is like not that easy. Otherwise, I think we would have figured it out by now. But I think the main takeaway is that it becomes more and more fragmented, what consumers are seeking and craving, and the consumers more and more empowered, which makes the other players in the ecosystem a little bit more at the mercy of the end consumer, and we should certainly listen to them.
Nikki, over to you. Obviously, you had a lot of experience seeing different aspects of content consumption through your previous experience. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I think the important thing with fans, so I think it's a really valid point that not everyone's a fan. So you've got that constant kind of fan arch. It's about bringing in those new fans, really serving them really well with new exciting stuff, but then also really serving your totally dedicated fans. So a couple of things that I think have been always really stood out to me is the relationship that we see with fans and, beyond the actual match or beyond the moment. So of course that is really crucial, but it's about all of the other stuff beyond that moment, beyond the 90 minutes, for example. So They love to see that really authentic content with athletes, with the stars on the pitch. So I think one of the guys speaking earlier today was talking about a day in the life of one of their football stars. Now that's brilliant. That really gives that authentic representation, and that's what a lot of fans want to see now. So on that side, I think it's about really thinking thoughtfully about what the fans are engaging with and using a lot of that data and insight to really serve them what they want. And then also being available on in different ways. So, whether that be having live streams on, like with the UEFA Women's Champions League, broadening that out on that platform. So I think that was a really interesting, different way to do it.
I mean, ultimately, sport is still built very much in traditional senses from a league-based model. Like you almost have to follow a league to justify the expense on a subscription to certain products or a team. But actually, people follow people more than ever now. Athletes, creators, and that's obviously something that you've really lent into from day one with Kings League.
Yeah, for sure. I think Yannick raises a very interesting point, which is before we even talk about or analyze the fan or what the fan wants, I think we should never ever lose sight of the fact that all of us ultimately are trying to engage with people in their free time, in their leisure time, and engage with what disposable income they have. And so on occasion, maybe perhaps we can do that successfully without going directly to the fan, but we can go indirectly through a family member who has no interest in our property, in our content, in our competition, whatever it may be. But they're the decision makers in the household, or they're the people that hold the purse strings. And so especially around the OTT space and around younger Generation Z, Generation Alpha, let's say, individuals, ensuring that what we're doing, what we're producing, and what's being put out there is attractive and is interesting, is engaging with all those different people. And so to your point about following content creators and following streamers, I think something that we've leaned into very, very heavily at the Kings League is that natural, that organic, and that healthy overlap between what people may consider more traditional sport, as is the case of football, but also the community, the engagement, and also the loyalty that people have in following their favorite streamers or their favorite content creators, and that they don't have to have a sort of homogeneous activity. So streamers, obviously, the origin is from the esports world, from video gaming and so on, but many of them have other passions, other interests in life. And so football and related, let's say, content activity is very naturally, I think, one of those. And that's something that we've seen inside the Kings League and the Queens League to great effect so far.
Yeah, just anecdotally to that point and it didn't happen yesterday, so it was a couple of years ago, but previously the experience or the personalized experience that you got as a user on OneFootball was catered around your favorite team, your national team, and the competition probably your favorite team is playing in. We added, because we just saw it in the user behavior, that you can all of a sudden follow player, follow creator like broadcasters on the platform, because these became much more relevant signals in terms of how this translates into engagement, that nowadays actually these inputs are higher weighted than, okay, I follow this team, which is one of 10 clubs I'm following. This is a quite weak signal in terms of how engaged they might be. But ultimately, as you said, Eduard, it's about the limited resources of the end consumer that everybody's vying for, not only within sports, but above.
It's really annoyed me a few times when I've been on platforms and it's like, which club do you follow? And I'm like, I don't follow a club. I just want to follow the sport. I want to follow, it might be an athlete, but it might just be I want to watch some content. Why do I have to follow a team? And that does almost alienate people from day one. And
finally, just here, it's not that easy as an end consumer to explicitly express what you are interested in. So there are the explicit signals. Okay, I'm following this, that, and the other entity, but then also consumption behavior and so on that is implicit or it's observed is as important, if not more important.
And that's obviously where the technology side can really play a key role. Ed, I just want to go back to your point about some specifics on how you actually use the creators and the partners you have. What are you giving them? What tools are you giving them to get your content out to market? Because I think and whether it's the live side or the non-live.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of the two. So we took a leaf out of the book of Riot Games and their League of Legends, let's say, property. And so as a league, we have a distribution strategy where we have official league channels on streaming platforms. So we distribute via Twitch, via YouTube, via TikTok, via Kick. And then the individual streamers, the individual content creators who own the teams, they co-stream at the same time simultaneously. So we literally can have 6 simultaneous channels of live content going out. And so the co-streamers have the right to be able to have the feed on their channel. And obviously as a league, it's in our interest that they co-stream the games as well, because they're bringing their audience, their community to the accumulated, let's say, Kings League ecosystem in that respect. And then obviously, because streamers and content creators, they're teams that play the Kings or Queens League, they have 1 hour, 1 match per week. They obviously have a lot more activity, a lot more content generation that they're working on during the rest of the week. So we're also helping and facilitating them with content so that they can be with their communities talking about, building up hype and in essence, driving traffic sort of mutually in both directions around the content of the competition.
So lots more exposure, lots more reach, leaning to this hugely scaled audience. The challenge I think everyone is sort of trying to get their heads around though is how do you turn that into ROI for the organization? Awareness is great, reach is great, but it's ultimately got to start delivering at some point. Ed, I want to ask you that follow up for that and then we'll move and go through the panel. How do you turn that massively increased scaled reach that these creators have such a following into ROI for you?
So in our case, the main core is around sponsorship, so brand partnerships, advertising, licensing, merchandising, and a smaller amount of in-venue ticketing. And on the brand side, I think the really important thing is, as a private disruptive property, there are no limits to the creativity of how we can integrate brands. So we have, the players in the league are employed by the league. And so therefore any type of initiative that we have where we want to creatively integrate a brand, we're able to do it in the most, let's say, natural and organic ways, but without having, as is the case in some other sports properties, the clubs and the club partners, the unions, the existing federation regulations. So it really is, it's refreshing to be able to sit down and brainstorm, because I think it's very important to understand where a brand is coming from and what their strategy, what their priorities are. Because oftentimes I think in sports, we have like a fixed playbook and we've prepared that and it's great, it's amazing, it has our metrics and we're in love with it. And we go to each brand and we sell them this amazing opportunity. When I think the first step, which is healthy, is just literally asking the question, what do you want to get out of the partnership? What are you looking for? And then we're fortunate that we have the flexibility to be able to tailor different things based on their needs in that respect.
So you're having to go out and basically sell it pretty much one-to-one effectively to brands, rather than say rely on things like programmatic advertising to drive that. And Nikki, with your background, obviously you've worked a lot in the ad space. How do you see this opportunity and that approach and maximizing the potential ad revenue that I think is still the big unlocked area of the sports industry?
Yeah. So I think that the example is really great here. So, one thing is like having those really good relationships with the creators, the ones that really work for you, that they've got that combined interest. So, but also I appreciate the challenges for some of the more traditional leagues that have these other, other things that they have to consider. So I think for them, it's about finding creators that are linked to them and have the same kind of why they want to work with them. Make sure they've got that. It needs to be a long-term relationship. And then in regards to the advertising around that, I think they need to be going to market, at the same time. So often what you see is that, kind of property is out in market and then a new opportunity comes up, but it's later in the cycle. That can be really challenging for brands because they've done their budgeting, they've got their plans in place. So the more you can work with the brands, understand exactly what they need, what their cycles are, then you can kind of plan with that and then try and make some more innovative pieces as well as obviously just making the most out of good impressions.
And so that's linked with particularly like an activation spend on an existing sponsorship to leverage the digital platforms, or is that even in the sense of talking to a brand that's completely disconnected from a sports property?
Either or. So trying to go out in the same kind of cycle, obviously you've got your league cycle, so you're going to have to work within that, but making sure you've got your full, what you're going to be taking to market, for your league, being able to take that to the brands in one time is obviously the ideal scenario.
Yannick, I know that obviously advertising as a revenue stream is an important one to OneFootball. Talk about your approach.
No, absolutely. And I think, or I guess the textbook says that monetization follows engagement. And even though I think it's an ever constant challenge for the industry to engage the end consumer, I think the consumer marketplace still engages with sports overall. It might be in different shapes and forms as before and not like one size fits all. But I think then how we translate that engagement that still exists, it might be bigger than ever. If you league executives argue that this is the case, how it translates into then tangible business impact. And on our side, I mean, we don't try to reinvent the wheel. I think there's an established dual revenue stream in the sports broadcasting marketplace, direct to consumer payments in which form, whatever, and advertising. And the broadcasters that we carry, whether it's Sky, DAZN, Globo, but also increasingly broadcasters that are operated by leagues. For us, just another broadcast, an entity that has content, trying to reach, engage, and monetize the consumer. It's about amplifying those existing revenue streams and advertising. It can be more interactive, it can be more contextual. I think there is technology that can enable ROI. And on the direct-to-consumer, yes, the monthly multi-sports subscription might be outdated. Not for everyone. It's still a great fit and great value for money for a certain and very high income part of the market. But for a more or less mature segment of the market, it might not be the best fit. So I think the industry needs to get more granular in the offering to capture more of the supply, because I think more of the demand, because I think the demand is there, that we see in the engagement numbers.
Well, you raised the point about not sort of suggesting everyone's a fan. I think that's the important, all the different layers of quote unquote fandom or consumption. You could be, subscription product might be great for that top tier fan who's really passionate and wants to do more there, but there's a lot of other tiers that's never going to be their playbook for them, no matter what you offer.
And probably you don't even need to market and promote to that diehard fan who is into all sports imaginable and is what he or she decides to do on the weekend and being glued to the TV screen, mobile screen or whatever. You don't even need to promote and market probably, but that is low-hanging fruit. Problem is there are only so many diehards around the world to make the huge economics of the sports landscape work. So you need to, I guess, move further down the pyramid to capture value from there.
So we work in an industry that has a lot built on the foundations of big, massive media rights deals, and everything comes off of that. The three of your respective backgrounds come from organizations, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically on the foundations of partnerships, shared risk, shared upside, and mass scale of audience in most instances. Is that fair to say? Do you think that a subscription alone is just completely out of date? You need to have all of those levers being pulled at the same time to serve those different layers? Or Ed, for you, do you even have anything to do with a subscription proposition available to a percentage of audience, or is it purely that mass reach through Twitch and YouTube and alike?
No, I mean, currently our focus is very much on building the brand, building audience, building engagement, and so strategically, that's not something we're focusing on at the moment. In the future, as the property matures, I think it's something to be explored, perhaps some way down the line. To your point about is it expired or antiquated, I think it really depends property by property and let's say maturity level, scale, global strategy, and so on. I think it's no secret that that the NBA League Pass is an incredibly successful OTT subscription platform, and Major League Baseball, BAMTech, they got the technical expertise before anyone else, and focus on this as a competition organizer. I think it really depends again on what the strategy is, but I think we're going back to the point, like Yannick said, about how many people are in that sort of hardcore, at the top of the pyramid. And relatively speaking, even if you're a global property like football, and even if you're a global premium competition like the Premier League, there's more. Okay, there's more hardcore fans. There's more diehard fans than other properties. But in order to continue growing and evolving, as Yannick said, you have to move down the pyramid, and that's something that I think it'll be very interesting. And I don't know if I'm upsetting people in the room here, but for example, on our side, we lean very heavily on big tech. So we lean on Twitch, Amazon, we lean on YouTube, Google. We have a lot of content we push out on Instagram, Meta. So we lean on that, and the value for the end user is that they have a one-stop shop for all of their leisure needs. So for the end user, it's great. For big tech, it's great because they siphon all of the data, they siphon all of the revenue, and the competition organizer or the rights holder, let's say, has a relatively small amount of, let's say, revenue at the end of the day in terms of ad share and so on, and has no visibility, no access to the data of those users. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see what the evolution is of that relationship between big tech and, in our case, sports properties and so on, but also the wider sort of entertainment sphere as well.
I was just going to say that one example of this, there seems to be more levers being brought to market by those big tech companies as well. YouTube launched primetime channels, added pay-per-view, e-commerce solutions, etc. But even the e-commerce component is still fairly in its infancy on a lot of these platforms. It's only really just coming to fruition. So it's still we're still uncertain of how impactful that's going to be. But those levers are starting to pop up on those big tech platforms as well.
Yeah, I guess back then you said the relationship is complicated. The industry is still figuring out this value exchange between big tech and the content owners. I think, as you said, big tech creates a lot of value, but also captures a lot of that value. And then how this value exchange between big tech and the content owners inform, and I think these are not, or symptoms of a bigger trend that they recognize that they need to create value, like more direct monetization opportunities, like pay-per-views directly built in, where the content creators develop the audience in the first place. Because normally, if I have a YouTube channel, if I'm a big sports broadcaster of millions, there's a lot of friction in moving those millions onto my owned and operated, push them through the sign-up funnel, and then stick around for multiple months. I mean, this looks and sounds nice on a piece of paper conceptually. I think practically there's a lot of friction and imperfections in there. So I think it is involving. But just one point that you mentioned it's also property specific, whether reach or revenue or a balance of both. I think it's also a function of the cost base of a league. If I'm the Premier League and have billions of player salaries to fund, I can't go all in on reach. I must at least have a healthy balance, if not tend towards revenues. For them, they are not going D2C, but whoever has Premier League rights, probably given the fact what they paid for it, they can't afford to prioritize reach. So there is a paywall needed. Does it need to be the monthly multi-sport subscription paywall? Is then a downstream question. But if I would have to choose one model, I would go for the monthly subscription. It's the reason why everybody does it, but I think there can be more to capture more of the demand.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it really depends on the league, doesn't it? And how big they are and what's kind of happening for them and what their objectives are. But overall, they need to be using all of those platforms to grow the audience, to grow that fandom. So whether that be putting pieces of content out there and growing their audience in that way to bring them back into their own properties as well. But also, I was just thinking that. Testing and learning. So the really important thing that leagues need to do is to keep making sure that they're trying out some of those new monetization models that are there. I think sometimes we kind of stick in what we're doing and we don't want to kind of rock the boat too much, but it's, one of the most important things is to kind of keep making sure that part of your plan is to do that and learn from it. Sometimes it's not going to work, sometimes it is, but that it's kind of keeping doing that. I think women's sport has a really big opportunity because they're not restricted in the same way that some of the men's sport is. And I think that can be a really good place to do some new ways of doing stuff, some new models, and trying out and learning from that.
And this is a huge benefit for women's sports. It's a huge benefit for up-and-comers like the Kings League, that they have somewhat of a green field. They don't have to account for the existing business where it's expensive to operate and to maintain, let alone grow the business. So I think these properties and competitions are actually in the position to truly innovate, because with established properties, there is understandably a lot of inertia, and it is what it is.
Yeah, completely. The thing I see now is that the legacy framework of what currently most of the sports properties are working with is really holding them back for that innovation.
Exactly.
So the ability to test and learn, like you said, Nikki, is really challenging when you've your hands are tied behind your back. Well, don't get me wrong, you're getting a massive check from a broadcaster and platform. That helps deal with the suffering of not getting access to all the data and whatnot. But let's be clear, if sports was starting from scratch, Kings League is a great example of basically starting from scratch in a couple of years, you wouldn't typically follow the approach that is being followed by pretty much every sport. And you talked about objectives. I sit and think about, well, it depends what their objectives are. I think all sports have a fairly actually similar set of objectives at a macro level if they're all starting from scratch. The problem is everyone's working in a different legacy framework that's holding them back to achieve all those objectives, and they sort of have to work around it. We've seen even some pretty major leagues in Europe have real struggles even following that existing model, and I think in the next couple of cycles you're probably going to have to see some pretty dramatic moves by them at some stage, and a lot are going to suffer because of the financial pressures on those organizations. We've got about 6-7 minutes left. I will look for questions from the audience on the platform in a couple of minutes. I want to quick fire a little bit and go questions around disruption. And I'll start with you, Ed. Obviously, you've been in the industry for quite a while, but also looking through a different lens. What disruption does the sports industry still need?
Great question. I think, and it's probably challenging for me to answer that one fully. I think that the disruption that's still missing is the bridge to the mainstream. So I think the sports industry, we've evolved a lot, we've innovated a lot. The growth mindset that Nicky alluded to, trial and error and so on, I think that there's a degree of that. But the reality is, if we compare ourselves to, the FMCG industry, if we compare ourselves to consumer goods, if we compare ourselves to other, let me say, grocery, shopping, supermarkets, if we compare ourselves to other much larger industries in terms of relative size, we need to disrupt more. We need to innovate more and we need to grow more. And that's just a reality.
Nicky, what does the industry need?
So I think it's all about that testing and learning, like looking at what Netflix is doing with kind of entertainment, sport entertainment properties. That's really exciting. It's broadening it out. So it's just, being brave, taking some chances and, learning from them in the way that works for them themselves.
Yannick, what does the industry need from a disruption perspective?
I think the disruption has already entered the market with the empowerment of the end consumer. Because for a long time, first the broadcasters, then the leagues were like in the convenient position to pretty much dictate terms on which they are purchased and consumed. And I think now with so much and abundant options out there, I think the end consumer is in the driver's seat. And it may take a couple of years more, but I think just the balance of power is shifting. And at some point, either adjust or probably not die, but at least don't grow to the same extent as before. So I think the end consumer and having all the options and optionality is the disrupting force that will be needed.
Are there any examples of technology that you think that exist that have disrupted or will disrupt the way you work or the industry works? That makes sense. Ed?
I think we're applying some of them in the Kings League. We have indoor drones shooting live footage, which a couple of years ago would be completely unheard of. Body cams in game, referees, coaches mic'd up, etc. But I also think it's similar to the disruption piece. The technology around the corner is the one that we have to be ready for, and so we have to maintain the flexibility, we have to maintain the adaptability, and we have to maintain the capacity to continue to innovate instead of, let's say, relying upon the technology that we have today because it's evolving at a high pace.
Nicky, any examples of technology there that you can?
Yeah, so exactly. So I think it's, Gen AI is going to, is right here. So we need to kind of be ready for that. But also just thinking about AI in general. So clipping, so being able to, use those tools now to clip highlights out of archive footage or just generally be so much more efficient at that. That is going to get a lot more content out there.
And a lot of people already leaning into that space pretty heavily now. Lots of great companies here doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can just piggyback on that one. I think one project group that we have that is working with our broadcasters available on the platform is like reimagining the live experience from long to short form.
Yeah.
So it's all about live, but I think it's a more curated version of the live experience that adheres to shorter attention spans and all of those kind of things, which is technically enabled and fully automated. So it's less about disruption, but innovation. So it's not disruptive. It's like just
giving
evolving
the fans what they want, isn't it? That's what they want.
Absolutely. Let's go to some questions from the audience. I've got one to wrap up on, but let's start with the top one. What type of disruption and innovation would you like to see from women's sports properties? We've talked about the fact there is a lot of opportunity because they are starting relatively with a blank canvas. The recent WS deal, the Women's Super League in the UK, had something that's flown under the radar in general terms, but the fact that they're giving a lot more access and rights to the athletes for content around, I think, live and the highlights packages. So they're actually facilitating and enabling that, which is fairly unprecedented, I think, but something that's really important. Anything else they should be looking at there? Nikki, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, so I think that's great. Giving the athletes the ability to use highlight clips is brilliant. But I think also yesterday they were talking about kind of growing women's viewership of women's sports. So I think growing the men's viewership of women's sports too, but also like connecting with those creators that the women are watching that might be in a totally different area from the women's sport, but to really introduce them. I think that's a really way to kind of connect well with them.
Yannick?
I think it's about not only for women's sports, but everyone, like reducing engagement and consumption barriers, which could be of cost nature, of discovery nature, technology nature. So I don't think we need to be as drastic as, okay, instead of 90 minutes, let's play 45 minutes in order to adhere to shorter attention spans. I don't think we need to be that disruptive, but I really like the idea of content versioning, because just preferences, how to consume, how to engage, are much more diverse than in the past. And also no platform has a monopoly on the audience anymore. They are all fragmented. So I think content versioning is a big thing where there's a lot of innovation left.
A question from Goran. Why grow your audience to make big social platforms even bigger when these platforms do not share their ad income based on your content you give them for free? Yes, well, we've flirted around the edges of this. Ed, where we start with you there?
I think it's the elephant in the room, and many people tiptoe around it, and we're a very, very practical, I think, case study of a property of a competition that does just that today, and we're doing that because we're interested in growing our brand, we're interested in growing our audience, we're interested in growing our engagement, and we're interested, as Yannick has said, to making that accessible and to facilitating engagement for the people that want to and are interested in what we're doing. And so the reality is that because of the positioning that these big tech platforms already have, that is the easiest, that is the most direct, and that is the easiest, let's say, to consume for the end user. It's a nice, let's say, question to take home for all of us in that respect. But I also think that it's important to be pragmatic and objective and realistic in life. And so, I don't think the current position of big tech is going to make them change their ad share, let's say, policies anytime soon. And so, do you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution? So, let's proactively see how we can find solutions to that.
Yannick?
I think it's a deliberate decision that we at OneFootball at a much smaller scale made, instead of gatekeeping the access, just opening it up, the access to the consumer that they undisputedly have. And I think the example that you mentioned, like more direct monetization opportunities, stuff like that, I don't know if they will go ever down to data sharing, whatever, but I think there is movement and open-mindedness to cater and deliver and share
I do
more
think
value.
Some of the big tech platforms are listening. YouTube, as an example, has added more monetization methods on the platform, and there is some ad revenue sharing components. I think you're going to see more of that because it's constantly everyone wants more. But they're also the enabler for the scale and the opportunities that you talked about driving sponsorship opportunities. Really quick question to wrap up, because I'm conscious we are run over in time. Where is the growth? Is there one thing that you can point to, perhaps Ed, starting with you, on where's the growth going to come from in the next sort of 5 to 10 years for your organization?
In our case, it's very much about global expansion. It's very much about multi-language approach. And it's very much about widening the ecosystem, bringing together the streamers, the content creators, the football legends, and the content and product strategy.
Nikki, what's the big growth opportunity in sports?
Well, yeah, so I think that's a really good point, because you can go global now. You can make your, what you thought you were in your kind of town or your market that you're in. Now you can go much more broadly. You can use AI to do that as well. So I think it's like kind of really looking beyond the horizon that you initially had.
Yannick, where's the growth coming from for OneFootball's perspective?
For OneFootball perspectives, it is, for example, partnering up with like newcomers like Kings League, who have their own set of challenges like internationalization, audience expansion, where you may have complementary assets. For us, it's a new addressable market, because this is not the traditional football fan, but they may seek an experience that we deliver for other football competitions, to have a video, stats, news-driven ecosystem around like the new form of football. I think so. Let's say around partnerships, it is.
Well, hopefully you've all enjoyed that. Thank you very much for joining us. As I said, this is a recording that will be live also on the StreamTime Sports podcast. So do subscribe. But thank you. Please join me in thanking Yannick, Nikki, and Ed to the stage.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review, and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsPro Nick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, StreamTimers. Until next time.